While I was studying all the abstracted characters of the Amazing Digital Circus, I noticed that characters aren't created here by random chance. What do Frowny, Kaufmo, and Pomni have in common? Clowns. A circus is a circus because it always has a clown. They looked different and lived at different times, but the most interesting part? They never lived together. My theory today is on how to properly divide the entire circus timeline. We've had exactly 3 eras: the era of Frowny, the era of Kaufmo, and the current one, the era of Pomni. I'll tell you about each of them today, and you hit subscribe. Theories here every day. In the last episode, Kinger remembers Scratch, the first abstraction. We know that Kinger, Queenie, and Scratch were in the circus from the very beginning, but also with them in that quartet was this character, Frowny, a sad clown who doesn't look happy, even though they tried their hardest to make him that way. We see him crossed out on the bedroom doors, and he was the very first clown of the original 4. It's unclear how long he lasted, but he clearly didn't abstract first. When that happened, Queenie and Scratch were already gone. You can tell by his face he wasn't cheerful from the start, but in the end, it seems this drove him to a state of despair and he vanished. Reminder, 2 clowns cannot exist together. At the moment when Kinger's wife and his friend Scratch abstracted, Kinger himself fell into despair, so he didn't even notice that his last remaining friend, Frowny, needed support, and eventually he was gone too. I think at that moment, Kinger decided to close himself off from everyone and not even get to know the new characters that arrived. The moment Frowny abstracted, Kaufmo arrived at the circus, a clown much more familiar to us. By that moment, Kinger had already drifted away from everyone, but the new guys, Jax, Ribbit, and Kaufmo, became best friends. For a long time, this trio was the main group in the circus. Ragatha and other familiar characters had entered the world, but this trio remained the most important. We saw in episode 7 just how important these characters were to Jax, and I think that's why he made the decision, just like Kinger, not to make any more friends. Until the moment of Ribbit's abstraction, they were happy. She disappeared, and with her, her 2 friends. Kaufmo, the second clown, began to lose his mind and tried to find an exit as fast as possible. He searched everywhere, but in the end, he couldn't take it. Pomni appears exactly at the moment of Kaufmo's abstraction, the third clown. We see that this happens the very second the second clown is lost, so we assume it happened the same way the first time. Pomni becomes the third clown in the circus, and that is the moment we start watching the story of the Amazing Digital Circus. Everything I've told you is the detailed backstory of 2 whole eras that we weren't shown. Right now, we are merely watching part 3 of the massive lore that has been happening in this world for years, and I hope in episode 8, they finally show us everything that happened before Pomni. And what do you think? Write it in the comments. Have you ever stopped to wonder just how many characters in the circus have actually abstracted? We know the most about Queenie and Ribbit, and in episode 7 we finally heard the name Scratch, the character who was the very first to scatter into the void. But the truth is, the list of the lost is much longer than that. Today, I've gathered every clue from the show's frames to reconstruct the characters who once lived in the circus, but are now gone forever. I'm going to break them down one by one. We have to start with Queenie, Kinger's wife. He talks about her in episode 3 and mentions her again in episode 6. We know they arrived at the circus together, but more importantly, we know that she was the one keeping him sane. Have you noticed that in the dark, Kinger always becomes lucid and intelligent? My theory is that the darkness takes him back to the moment of her abstraction. In that trauma, his mind resets and he becomes himself again. For Kinger, who is likely one of the creators of this digital world, losing her was the heaviest blow of all. The next loss, and perhaps the most terrifying one for the group, was Scratch. As we now know, he was the first to abstract, and it seems Kane had a hand in it. Kane was likely experimenting with the character's consciousness and pushed Scratch to a state of psychological instability, causing him to glitch out and vanish. This is horrific because it means Kinger lost his first friend in the circus and then his wife. After that moment, Kinger had no friends or allies left. That is why when Jax and the others arrived, Kinger never really joined their group. He isolated himself because he knows the ugly truth. Everyone eventually abstracts. Let's move on to the less obvious characters. Green Guy. We saw this creature on a crossed-out door, but we know almost nothing about him. Based on the concept art, he looked like a strange goblin-like entity. He clearly arrived after the first trio, Kinger, Queenie, and Scratch, when Kinger had already lost his mind. But who he was friends with, we have no idea. Now, let's talk about the clowns. There is a very specific trend in the circus. When one clown leaves, another enters. Think about it. Pomni spawned exactly when Kaufmo abstracted. One jester replaces another. My theory is that Frowny was the clown before Kaufmo. This means he existed even before the second trio of Kaufmo, Jax, and Ribbit. It seems the circus creates a rule. There must always be at least one clown. Chronologically, we have 3 eras of clowns: Frowny, Kaufmo, and Pomni. Sock Puppet Mouse is a character clearly shown on a neighboring door. This character lived during the era of Frowny and abstracted during his time. We know almost nothing about the others from this era, except for their portraits. When Frowny finally scattered, Kaufmo arrived, starting the next era. Jax's loss. The main characters of Kaufmo's era were, of course, the new trio, Ribbit, Jax, and Kaufmo. Remember, Kinger didn't interact with them because he had already survived the death of his own generation. He stayed on the sidelines, but this new trio grew close. First, Ribbit disappeared, then, unable to handle the loss of his friend, Kaufmo gave in to the despair and abstracted too. And this leads to a dark conclusion. Jax has not much time left. In episode 7, he was on the verge of abstracting himself. He has lost everyone. It feels like he is the next one to go. I really hope episode 8 gives us more facts about the ancient characters who lived during the time of the first clown, Frowny. What do you think about the old cast? Leave your theories in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. We have new theories here every single day.